That was an amazing documentary. Almost 8 hours, you know, Peter Jackson, trilogies, he likes his trilogies. But I found myself being consumed by it. I've watched it twice, actually, because I wanted to take it all in the first time and then take notes the second time. Notes, I've got loads of notes, pages of the things. Oh, what did you see here? What happened there? What happened in that thing? So in this video, what I want to do is just give you my views of what I perceived the documentary to reveal to me. Everybody's going to have separate or individual feelings towards the documentary. But what I want to do, I'm going to break it down into 5 sections. So we're going to talk about the production. We're going to talk about the songs that were introduced, my observations as I was watching the show, revelations, and these are the things that, oh wow, I never knew that, or that explains something, you know, that kind of revelation. And then I want to finally talk about the players, what I call the players, because it wasn't just John, Paul, George and Ringo. There seemed to be an awful lot of interaction with the production team and also the partners of the Beatles, that kind of thing. Now, as we know, production was an accumulation of 60 hours of film footage and 150 hours of audio recording. And there's a disclaimer at the beginning of the production that says editorial choices had to be made. So we've got an 8-hour production split over 3 episodes, and it kind of begs the question for me, you used 60 hours of footage to produce 3 2.5-hour sections. What's missing? Is there still more footage that we are not being shown? The editorial choices, you know, has Peter Jackson said, you know what, this bit's pertinent, that bit's pertinent, we don't need to see that. I guess, you know, nobody wants to see 60 hours of ramblings. I certainly don't want to see 60 hours of them jamming consistently old songs. I'll get into that later. But, you know, that's his choice. And what he did reveal to us was just some amazing footage. What I would suggest, perhaps this is my point of view, I think 3/4 of that was a lot of just jamming and inane babble. Unless you're a true Beatles fan, or, you know, it's like you eat, sleep and drink and breathe it, then perhaps you appreciated that. As a band member, and I've been in several bands, being involved in practices where suddenly it veers off and one band member starts jamming a song, everyone joins in, especially the blues bands I've been involved with. 3-chord trick, oh my God, can you just get on with it? And that for me was what was happening here. I was watching an awful lot of them breaking into song, and I'm kind of saying to myself, can you just get on and learn the songs? You know, this is what you've got to do. You've got like 2 weeks to learn 14 songs. So in terms of the production, potentially we could have had 3 2-hour shows, or even 3 1.5-hour shows. Is this kind of like how Peter Jackson spins a story? And we hark back to his epics, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now I've watched these and I think, you know what, you could cut that bit out, you could cut that bit out, you could condense the whole story. Lord of the Ringos. I saw a comment. That was Peter Jackson's Lord of the Ringos. So yeah, in terms of production, perhaps a tad too long. But you know what it did show me? And that was the fact that while they're jamming, they're bonding, and they're actually getting the kind of creative juices flowing, which is probably what was required. You know, actually they hadn't practiced, they hadn't played together properly since 1966. You know, we're talking a 2.5 year span, and in fact, the only time they'd actually got together was for the Hey Jude production, and they performed that live, and it was recorded. So they were kind of eager to get back into it. So the fact that Peter Jackson is showing us all the footage of them jamming songs of their own and also songs of, you know, previous artists, perhaps the you know, the likes of artists that they performed at the Cavern in Hamburg, because they would just jump into those songs, and Peter Jackson gives us that footage. So it's kind of good, a little bit kind of over the top for me, but yeah, production tad long for me. They had 3 weeks before the actual show that they had planned. So they had to come up with 14 songs. This was Paul's idea, 14 songs. And you hear it kind of bandied around throughout the production. Come on, we got 14 songs to do. But what fascinated me was we get to see how prolific they are as writers, because they've already got a whole batch of songs that each of them has composed and written, and they start bringing them in during the filming of the production. Not only the songs that end up on Let It Be or Get Back, but we start hearing kind of the fruits of the songs that would end up on Abbey Road, that would even end up on some of their solo projects. So on day one, we see John singing a song called The Road to Marrakesh. My ears break up and I'm immediately hearing Jealous Guy. I didn't know that it was The Road to Marrakesh. We see Don't Let Me Down and The Two of Us being kind of jammed and introduced. There's All Things Must Pass. George Harrison brings that one in. One of the amazing song structures is when Get Back is first introduced. Now, John hasn't arrived at the session, and we see Paul with his bass guitar, and in front of him Ringo and George are just sat on the drum pedestal, and he's just riffing away on a chord, and it just develops into Get Back, and it's mesmerizing to watch. It's just like, oh, so this is it. You're just strumming a note. I was just in awe of it, just watching him do that. Then you see Maxwell's Silver Hammer, and that was actually going to be on the Let It Be. That was one of the songs that was on the sort of the hit list. And they give Mal Evans a hammer, and there's an anvil brought in. Bang, bang. The guy's so happy to be playing this. I Me Mine is introduced on day one. On part one. And George says, oh, you know, I was writing a song yesterday. I thought, you know, and it's the next day. He was writing this song yesterday. He was watching a television program, you know, and he starts playing I Me Mine. And you hear Ringo in the background, and he's saying, oh, you know what, you could put a bit of rock and roll in the middle there, which of course is the fast part of I Me Mine. Let It Be, we see that being introduced. Another Day, Paul sitting at the piano, just every day she takes a morning bath. Doesn't sing the words that we're used to, but actually that's par for the course with his songwriting, you know, scrambled eggs and everything. Just put something down and change the words when you have to. The Long and Winding Road. Now this is really good, because you've got Paul at the piano and you've got Mal Evans leaning over, and he's kind of scribing out the words, kind of like dictation. Paul's giving him dictation. And Paul says to him, I haven't got the second verse yet. I want it to be like obstacles, you know, something is kind of in his way. Mal's like, what? Like obstacles in the road? You know, traffic cones, crashed cars, whatever it may be. But as he's singing it, and he's kind of saying, you know, I want it to be a weather obstacle up ahead, and he can't come up with it. And this is where we know the song so well. I'm shouting at the screen. I'm going, the dark and windy night, Paul, try the dark and windy night. I kind of wanted him to start singing it so that I could see it from, you know, developing from nothing, which he doesn't. So obviously it gets written later on. It's just a magical moment. We see Golden Slumbers. We see Carry That Weight. Now Paul says, "Oh, this is a comedy song for Ringo." They launch into a kind of, you know, boy, you're going to carry that weight. It just makes it. It's just amazing to see how things that influence their lives, whatever, turn out to be songs. She Came In Through the Bathroom Window is introduced in the first part, and Paul goes, "It's something that happened to me in real life." Okay, so we move into part 2 and we see Get Back getting more and more developed, and they're coming up with the words sweet Loretta Marsh, sweet Loretta. And again, and this perhaps is you know, a tribute to Peter Jackson's kind of editing techniques, because it was Michael Lindsay Hogg that actually filmed everything. But I felt like I was there. I was actually involved in those practice sessions, not just a fly on the wall, but it was like I'd been given a seat just on the peripheries, and I was, you know, I'm shouting to Paul. I'm going, Martin, sweet Loretta Martin, try that. He didn't hear me. He paid no attention to me, but it must have gone in there subliminally. Later on we see Paul singing Backseat of My Car. He says, yeah, it's just an idea I came up with this morning. This morning. I can't remember the words off my head. John Brings Mean Mr. Mustard. And actually you see him playing that through and through the whole Twickenham kind of sessions. Every now and again he launches into it. And Polythene Pam comes in. I'm looking at my notes here. Her Majesty, Teddy Boy, what have we got there? Dig It comes in, and that's kind of credited to all 4 of them, and it's one of the few songs that credited to all 4 Beatles. I got my notes behind the camera there. Octopus's Garden comes in on part 3, and you see Ringo at the piano. I'd like to be under the sea. I didn't know Ringo could play the piano. And actually in some footage you see him with a guitar in hand, and he even picks up Paul's bass, albeit left-handed, and he's playing it right-handedly. So I guess, you know, years and years of intensive playing with each other as a band means that they're going to pick up traits. They're going to pick up little twiddly bits. Obviously McCartney and Lennon are multi-instrumentalists. Everybody has a go on the drums. You even see George Harrison playing the drums in one instance. And then, of course, he plays piano. You see him playing piano on Old Brown Shoe. And he's like, I want this chord inversion. I want it to be different. And Billy Preston offers up some kind of chord changes. So it's just amazing to me to see all these different songs, not only the 14 songs or however many, you know, end up being on the Let It Be album, but actually the introduction of songs that would eventually be on their solo projects, but, you know, also on the Abbey Road album. Specifically the medley, because the medley's renowned as being a medley of songs that were never fully completed. So, you know, that kind of works. I like Abbey Road. It's my favourite album. Okay, let's have a look at some of my observations of the actual production. Observation-wise, it's clear that the band hadn't performed together since 1966. And in fact, the only time between 66 and Twickenham that they actually did perform was when they did the TV special for Hey Jude. So they would have obviously got together and practiced. So what we see here in the Let It Be sessions is the band kind of harking back to their early days when, you know, albeit Hamburg, it's 8 hours a night, 6 nights a week. These guys are really honed, but they haven't played together for 3 years. And you can see that they really, really enjoy it. It's kind of a very uplifting time. Once they get over the kind of the hiccups and the sound studio issues at Twickenham and they move to Apple, boy, it really lifts off. It's really, really good. But while they're at, one observation was the Hare Krishna guy at the back, and this is about harking back to Hamburg and Cavern and early days. It's a little hark back to A Hard Day's Night, because there's a Hare Krishna guy in the back, and Paul goes, "Who's the guy?" I think it's John says, "Oh, he's Hare Krishna. He's very, very small or something." Paul goes, "Very clean though," which is the grandfather scene in the train for Hard Day's Night. But one thing I did find that, and again, I probably mentioned this in the production section, was that they did an awful lot of just jamming, jam, strum, sing, and a lot of it was kind of, to me, redundant. But I think it did get their creative juices flowing, certainly in terms of bonding them together so that they could perform well together. Then that really worked. As early as day 2 on the production, George mentions that he's got a lot of tunes that he can contribute to the show. But during the practice session for Don't Let Me Down, this is where you see the conflict building up between Paul and George, because George is kind of twiddling over John's vocals. And I've mentioned this in several of my bands, you know, the vocal is the story. It's the thing that the listener is listening to, unless it's an instrumental. So if you have another instrument distracting from that vocal line, it kind of mishmashes the song. And I think Paul was onto something here, because he was saying to George, you know, you're playing while he's singing, words to that effect. And that's where the kind of the previous version of Let It Be gives us the conflict between George and Paul, and kind of leaves it hanging. But Peter Jackson has a resolution to that, because we see Paul explaining, you know how we did it in Hey Jude, and in Hey Jude I asked you not to play the guitar at certain parts, and of course George retorts well, I'll play what you want me to play, and I won't play if you don't want me to play. But actually at this point you start, and it could be poetic or artistic license for Peter Jackson, because he starts focusing more on how George is disheartened, you know, how he's feeling a little left out. There's this section where John and Paul are working through the guitar parts, and we know George is the lead guitarist of the band, so actually having Paul tell John, I want you to play this, do this, play that, and the camera focuses in on George, and he really looks quite peed off, to be quite honest. And that's kind of highlighted when George says, you know, he's got some suggestions for the song, and you see Paul just kind of glaze over. It's like, oh, yeah. And he's looking off into the distance while George is explaining kind of his input. And from that point on, you start to see George and John interacting more. And of course, the point where Paul stands up and he says, I'm coming across like a boss, and I don't want to do that. All I'm trying to do is give direction. So my suspicions here is that, having not been together for 3 years plus to do a proper production and perform together, they've all started developing their own artistic merits and styles. And so to come back into a situation like this, where you've got one of the band members directing the others, they're kind of like, who do you think you are telling me? I'm a guitarist and I'll play my guitar my way, you know. One thing I did observe was that Ringo, the patience of a saint, he just sits at his drum kit, no input, and he just waits and drums. But you do see him, like when they're performing, and he's watching intently at the lads so that he can see where the song is going, and, you know, should I put a fill in here? Should I should I be hitting the snare? And he's watching Paul closely. Then he's looking over at John like this. And so yeah, he's doing a lot of stuff. One thing that's mentioned is that the band seems to be directionless, and it's because they've lost Brian Epstein, and in fact their daddy figure, they haven't got a daddy figure anymore, and maybe that's Paul trying to slip into Brian's shoes in that respect. We see George finally at the end of the session stand up. And it's kind of, really subdued, but I think I'll be leaving the band now. Like, rather than actually, look, I've got something to say. Can we sit down for a minute? He just steps up. I think I'll be leaving the band now. You can contact the NME, New Musical Express, see if there's some people out there who can come. Oh boy. But that's kind of the end of part one. And in any trilogy, part one is always build the story up. Part two is always the dark part of the story. And part three is always the enlightenment, yes, we've come to a solution. The first 3 episodes of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, was the dark one. First 3 episodes of, Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom, was the dark one. So here we have the lead up at the end of episode 1 to the breakup with George quitting the band. So you kind of anticipate part 2 of this is going to be kind of the dark episode. So George is gone. We then see just the final parts of part 1 where Dick James turns up. And Dick James is, in my opinion, a little bit of a sycophant. He's sucking up to the Beatles. He's trying to impress them. He turns out to be quite a villain in the story of the Beatles, giving John and George with Northern songs a really bad deal, and then selling off his share of Northern songs without offering that up to the Beatles. But you see him, he's kind of trying to impress the Beatles. Oh, George, how did you like the Christmas present I bought you? And he's showing the catalogue of songs to Paul, and Paul's like, you've almost got all of... What do you mean I've almost? It's very substantial. So I kind of, I took a dislike to this character. If it was not true life story and it was just a fictional novel, he'd be the baddie in my books. Well, maybe the second baddie. We don't see a lot of Alan Klein in this, but yeah, Dick James, there you go. And to that point, at the end of that session, you see Paul at the piano, and Dick James is trying to have a conversation with him, and Paul's like, yeah. And you see a character status here where Paul is up here and Dick James is down here. I want to reach that level. You're not coming up. Have you seen that sketch with the 2 Ronnies and John Cleese? I look down to him because I'm superior. I look up to him because he's superior, but I look down to him where he's, you get to Ronnie Corbett. I know my place. I'm sure there's something on YouTube for that anyway. But the end of episode 1 ends with kind of sullen images of the band and also the production team. No dialogue, but it has a very poignant music section over, and it's George singing, isn't it a pity? Yeah, it's kind of moving. So then we get into part 2, and they're moving into, they've left Twickenham, they've tried to resolve the issue with with George, and they move into Apple Studios at Savile Row. And actually the mood kind of lifts. George comes back. And it's here that you kind of start to see the relationship between John and Yoko. People have always perceived her to be the kind of the instigator of the Beatles breakup, kind of the bad influence that's come in. But actually throughout the whole production, she's shown in a good light. She's shown as having kind of a positive spin or attitude with John, and that lifts him up. He's clearly in love with her. And they have several kind of jamming sessions where Yoko's just at the microphone, wailing into a microphone. And, you know, before George comes in, you have one of those episodes, and they're all playing and they're jamming and they're having a good time. And then it happens again in Apple Studios. So yeah, Yoko seems to come across, and George, no, Paul is seen to say, you know, she's all right. And for an Englishman to say she's all right, I mean, she's top notch. I've got nothing against her, you know, she's cool. She's all right. So I don't think actually there was any animosity between them all. And this series really brings that in. Paul's kind of melancholy, sitting there going, you know, 50 years from now, people will say the Beatles split up because Yoko sat on an amp. I think it's in episode 2 that they start talking about, no, episode 1 they talk about Billy Preston, how they knew him in Hamburg. But then in episode 2, I think George had actually seen Billy Preston. When he'd left the band, he'd gone off to watch Ray Charles perform somewhere, and Billy Preston was there playing, and must have invited him to the Apple Studios because he turns up a day or two later. And this to me is kind of like, beep boop, you know, light eyes opening. I could put this in my Revelation section. But he sits at the electric piano and they just, you see the mood lift. It's just amazing. His contribution on Don't Let Me Down, on Get Back, just jamming away, and the guy is just happy to be there. He's smiling at the footage has him smiling all the time. He's playing all yeah, it's just I felt really good for that. It was a good moment. They say, shall we get him in? And they eventually get him on contract from Capitol Records to join them, and he's credited as being, it's not the fifth Beatle. I'll come to that in a minute. But on Get Back, it's the Beatles with Billy Preston. That's his credit. But they're saying you should join the band, you know. And then he's out of the room, and they're all four of them are discussing it, and they go, you know, he's like the fifth Beatle. Now, I'd always thought George Martin was the fifth Beatle, you know, all his contributions musically and the production. But if that was the case, I think the Beatles would have acknowledged and maybe said Billy Preston was the sixth Beatle. So they probably don't perceive George Martin as the fifth Beatle. The world does. So yeah, we see him as the fifth Beatle. So from John's mouth, Billy Preston, the fifth Beatle. Is that the case? And then for one of my final observations, it's in series 3, and they're all having a jam, and you've got Yoko wailing into a microphone again, and little Heather McCartney's kind of standing there, kind of, and you're putting thoughts in her mind. What is that? What? I don't get this. It's like a 5-second snippet. It's really quick. You've got to read between the lines. However, Dig It is then performed again, and a microphone is given to Heather McCartney. How old was she? 5, 6, 4? And she's wailing in. It's like, I know how to do it because I watched Yoko Ono. It's really good. Okay, so my final observation is Glyn Johns. I thought this guy was superb. You know, it's almost like he was the producer, because he was almost in every scene. He sat with the Beatles, encouraging them to do, you know, the music. He's talking and suggesting to them about the music. But he's such a cool character. And he's got, you know, these huge 60s specs on. And there's at one point, and it's 1960s phraseology that gets me. You know, it's like groovy, man. Yeah, it's cool. And he says to Paul, I like the songs. You've got them together. Or some words to that effect. it's the sound is very together. So I don't know whether he meant, you know, you're all gelling, or it's like, it's hip, man, it's together. And he's wearing a roll neck sweater, for heaven's sake. So they're my observations. And now we're going to look at the revelations. Now, revelations, nothing to do with the Bible. But for revelations, what I want to do is just quickly discuss or talk about moments through the 3 episodes that kind of sparked something in me that, you know what, I didn't know that. Or, you know, I'd always perceived something to be this, but it reveals to me that it's that, you know. So, yeah, it's amazing stuff. So, in no chronological order, Getback. I think we've always perceived Getback to be a song that he kind of targeted at Yoko Ono. And John's purported to have said every time Paul sang the words "Get Back," he would look at Yoko to do that. But actually you see the metamorphosis, you know, sort of the build-up of the song, starting with the riffing. Paul has no idea where he's going with this. And then in another session, they're already, I think they've arrived, and he was watching something on the television with Enoch Powell, who in the 60s was instigating the kind of the race protests because of his desire to have less immigration in the UK. And so Paul is starting to kind of build the song up in such a way that he kind of wants it to be, if you're an immigrant, you need to get back, because that's the mood of the moment. I don't believe for a minute that that was his, you know, feelings, because, you know, the guy's all love and peace. There's nothing about prejudice in his blood at all. But that's kind of the birth of Get Back. It's very much rooted in the immigration issues at the time. Oh no, I've lost my McCartney backdrop. The computer went to sleep. There we go. I want that in the picture, if nothing else. I don't have a Beatles mug. Yeah, chocolate bars. So yeah, Get Back is not a direct assault on Yoko Ono. It's very much a song built over time, but reflecting the mood of society and immigration. Clever stuff, because that actually ends up not being a song about that. It's a song about 2 people, you know, Sweet Loretta Martin and Jojo, and wherever they've gone, they need to get back. That's what it is. Simple as. For You Blue. Now, you see George coming in and he says, I've got a song that I wrote the night before. The night before. You kind of think these guys are really on a roll. The creative juices are starting to flow like crazy. So where I'm, you know, some songs are brought to the table from old songs or something they've been working on over time. But For You Blue is brought in. I was working on this last night. This one might work. And of course it ends up coming, getting on the album. It's amazing stuff. We see Michael Lindsay Hogg as the producer really pushing the concept of the TV show. Now, I can't ever remember seeing Let It Be, the original movie. I might have seen it, I don't know. I just have no recollection of it. So actually seeing these 3 2.5-hour episodes felt like a first for me. So I get to see and understand what the whole concept of it was, that Let It Be would be a TV special. Let It Be would be that they would record and perform in front of a live audience. And that was the objective they were aiming for. And Michael Lindsay Hogg kind of pushes the whole concept throughout all 3 episodes. And at one point, the Beatles say, look, we'll do the music, you concentrate, because they've abandoned so many ideas that it should be performed abroad, that it should be performed on a boat. So it's got to the stage, well, we don't know where it's going to be performed. Michael, you sort it out. And then you see at the end of episode 2, Michael and Glyn are sat in front of McCartney, and they're kind of whisper, 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 but the text comes up saying they are suggesting a performance on the roof of Savile Row. And you see Paul, and he's like, oh. You know, and the camera footage, or the film footage, slows down. So, you know, again, artistic license of the production team, you know, let's make a thing of this. So that's good. A conversation takes place in the cafeteria between John and Paul, and this is quite a revelation, because Paul says to John, "You're the boss. You've always been the boss." And I guess, you know, John ran the Quarrymen. He recruited Paul. Paul offered up George. They had Pete Best. Pete was ousted. Ringo came along. It really was John's band from day one. And while you have the equal pairing of McCartney and Lennon, because they're both prolific writers and both prolific, I was going to say steerers of the Beatles, taking it in that, you know, unified direction, it was always John's gig. And Paul mentions this. He says, you know, you're the boss, but you've been taking a step back. And so I've come in as like secondary boss. And they try and resolve. It's a very intimate section of the film, and it's recorded surreptitiously. Who knows, they probably had a little microphone tucked away somewhere that Paul and George didn't see. And so it's very candid. They just have a really decent conversation, and they kind of resolve it. It's really, really good. George comes into the studio saying he's had a really bad night's sleep. And he said, all I could hear was John's voice saying, finish them as soon as you start them. And he's like, I'd started a song and I couldn't get to sleep, and I had to finish it because John said you've got to start them as soon as you finish them. Another revelation is John and how he's so enthusiastic about Alan Klein. You know, Alan Klein actually turns out to be the baddie in the Beatles story, not so much Dick James, but he starts off being the baddie and he ends up being the baddie. We all know the story of Alan Klein, but I think during the filming of Let It Be, John's enthusiasm to Alan Klein really lifts his spirits, and I think that's what helps in the creation of all the songs. Had he been sort of morose and I really don't want to do this, but he was so enthusiastic about Alan Klein that actually, on a plus side, it really benefits the whole production. And at the end of day 3, you hear George saying, I've got enough material to contribute to the Beatles albums for the next 10 years. So, you know, is that 10 songs or is that 20 songs? Because he only ever contributed 1 or 2 to their Beatles albums anyway. Let It, Abbey Road, Something, and Here Comes the Sun, the 2 songs released as singles off that album turn out to be just amazing. But he talks about, I'd like to do something as a solo, you know, just me, hang everyone else. He was going to write some songs for others. He's like, hang everyone else, let's just do it for me. And I think this, in terms of revelations, is an indication to me that all 4 Beatles have got to the stage where they don't actually need each other to be something that they will become. In other words, they have got the creative ability to go in a direction they want to, and actually it's for the best. And I think this is why the Beatles eventually split up. Quite apart from the acrimony and the kind of the lawyers and the suing and the accusations about girlfriends sitting on amps, actually they were four artists who were ready, their wings were ready to be spread, and they were ready to go off, fly off. Fledglings leaving a nest. You come up with your own kind of metaphor or whatever it is. They were ready to not be together. And George saying, you know, I've got enough material to last the Beatles for another 10 years. Is this why All Things Must Pass came out as a 3-disc LP set? Who can say? One of my revelations that I thought was rather endearing towards Ringo was that they call him Rich or Richie. And of course he's Richard Starkey. So you know, I don't think any of the lads would have called Paul McCartney Macca like the media does. Hey Macca, play Get Back again. So they call him Rich or Richie. Morning Rich, morning Richie. And I was watching an interview with Ringo and Barbara Bach, and they were talking about their car crash that they had in England. And Barbara's kind of stroking his hair, Ringo's hair. And she goes, yes, Richie. And she calls him Richie too. So that was a revelation, is Richie. And I think for my final revelation is John Glyn. Or Glyn Johns. Glyn Johns. He seems to be more than just an engineer. He's just all over the place all the time. I think I've already said that, but big thumbs up for Glyn Johns. I'll talk about him more in the part about the players. So let's do that. Okay, finally, what I like to call the players of this production. Quite apart from Peter Jackson, who actually isn't in it, he's just compiled the whole thing and did a splendid job, albeit a little bit long, but don't tell him that I said that. Paul McCartney takes the reins. He's clearly the guy driving the whole thing. John Lennon, you know, coming along for the ride. Yeah, it kind of all picks up at the end. And when you see them on the Rooftop concert, he's having a good time. He's really enjoying it. Ringo Starr, I think I've said this, the patience of a saint. He just sat there diligently behind his drum kit, playing when he needed to, not playing when he didn't need to. He seemed to have a good time. I think he did. George Harrison, he comes across to me as the most humble and the most loving and the most able to give member of the Beatles. I think after seeing this production, although I had a respect for him, I've got a newfound respect for him. The guy was just awesome. When Mal Evans passed away, none of the four Beatles anyway, attended his funeral. But George Harrison gave £5,000 to the family. And we're talking 1976. £5,000 was probably a lot of money. I'll put a little, you know, financial equivalent of what it is today up here for you. So, you know, because Mal Evans hadn't done his life insurance or something, and so the family had no money. So, you know, George, the heart of gold, really. George Martin, now he was the producer of the album, but you actually don't see a lot of input from him. You see him contributing a little bit, encouraging them to perform as they used to and telling them things are going good, but he kind of takes a back seat, which leads me to Glyn Johns, because he actually comes across as the producer. He's the one sat with the guys all the time, giving them input, suggesting sort of direction for songs, and yeah, he's just always on hand. And he went on to engineer and also produce the likes of Led Zeppelin, The Who, The Rolling Stones, Joan Armatrading, just lots and lots of other artists. Very prolific engineer and producer. And he comes across as a very likeable chap. I like him a lot. Can we have a documentary about Glyn Johns, please, Mr. Jackson? Michael Lindsay Hogg, not a lot to say about him. I like that he's in the production a lot. he was the one filming it, but we actually get to see him interacting with the Beatles. Dick James, I mentioned him earlier, the baddie in the Beatles. I didn't like this guy. I thought he was, as I say, a sycophant, you know, sucking up to the Beatles. And kind of like, I don't quite know why he was included in the documentary, but maybe that's the spin, to give us an outside person who's unlikable. Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono comes across as a very sweet person. You know, we've got this mental picture of the girl who split up the Beatles, you know, and the sort of wacky artist that she was. But, and some people have said she couldn't even speak English. I think she speaks pretty good English to me. She's talking to George Martin, where can I get a score? Where can I go and buy some scores? And for the practically all, apart from when she's doing some jamming with the lads, she's just sat there. You know, she might be reading a newspaper, she's just observing and watching. Yeah, Yoko Ono, good on you. We get to see Alan Parsons. Now, Alan Parsons was a tape operator during the Let It Be, and he was drafted in from EMI when they set up the studio in Apple Studios, Savile Row. I'm a big fan of Alan Parsons. And he went on to engineer and produce some very famous artists during the 70s. He was involved in Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Go and watch some documentaries on how the making of, you know, with the tapes looping around a room so that they could get the echoes. The guy was a genius. And we get to see him kind of sat in the recording booth on the floor, and then we see him doing some stuff. He doesn't get a lot of airtime. But it's kind of like, oh, there's Alan Parsons. It's like, forget the Beatles, look, there's Alan Parsons. I'm going to give over 10 seconds of my video to Dr. Evil.
Anyways, the key to this plan is the giant laser. It was invented by the noted Cambridge physicist, Dr. Parsons. Therefore, we shall call it the Alan Parsons Project.
We should call it the Alan Parsons Project. Yeah, I liked seeing him there. We see Linda McCartney making an appearance quite a lot. She brings Heather in. But her contribution actually is quite important to the Let It Be documentary because of her photography. And we know that she's kind of linked to the Eastmans. I don't think she's... Would I be right in saying that she's part of the Kodak family? Maybe not. Maybe that's just hearsay. Anyway, she was a renowned kind of photographer of rock stars and performances and things. So she's there and she's taking picture after picture. And it actually is very clever how Peter Jackson takes, you know, there's a moment where Paul might be singing Let It Be, and you see sort of the camera through the eye of the eyepiece of the SLR while she's taking the photograph. And then you see overlaid images of the pictures that she took. So yeah, her contribution is actually quite good. Billy Preston, I've got to mention him as a player. He really lifted the Beatles for this, especially on episode 2 and 3. And I really enjoyed watching him play and contributing musically to the sound of the songs. Yeah, he was an important. I think I'm going to say for my last of the players was Mal Evans. Now, he was the personal assistant and roadie of the Beatles, and you see him such a lot, and he takes lots of notation. When the boys are working out songs, he's diligently scribbling down the lyrics, you know, just, what did we say there, Mal? Oh, you know, and you see him, I think I mentioned this before, but they're doing The Long and Winding Road, and he's sat there and he's offering up things to McCartney. Now, the tragedy with Mal Evans is that while he was employed with the Beatles from 63 through 70, he had probably a lot of intimacy with the Beatles, but then wasn't associated with them after that. Although he did have a credit as a producer on A Badfinger, which was in the Apple catalogue. But when he died, and this, I didn't know this is so tragic, but he was high on Valium, and he was messing around with an air pistol, but the guy, an air rifle, but the guy called the police that was in the room with him, not knowing it was an air rifle. And the police turned up, and they're telling him to put the gun down, and he's like, no, no, and he's pointing this air rifle at the police, and they shot him dead. So tragic. Yes, self-defense. He could have had a real rifle, he was going to shoot them. So one of those misfortunate, tragic events. Here comes the sun. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Oh, that's bright. I'm filming with my window there, and the light is shining. So there are the players. That's my take. I say my take. If I was to do a review, you would expect me to, I suppose, criticise the production. Am I going to wait for a minute for that cloud to go in front of the sun? Yeah. Give me a minute. That's better. I had to pull the curtain too. So yeah, that's my review. It's not really a critique. I don't want to bombast it. I don't want to say, you know, don't watch the thing, it's just awful, it goes on and on and on. I do believe it could have been a little shorter, but on the whole it was very enjoyable, and I do like how I was transported into not only Twickenham but Apple Studios in Savile Row. It felt immense and amazing being there, because I felt I was there. Yeah, just amazing. If you get a chance to watch it, then you certainly should. So with that, I shall say thanks for watching and bearing with. Please give the video a like and subscribe. I will suggest that this is not, I don't have a Beatles channel. I'm not a reviewer of songs and videos. I just do my thing. But I am planning kind of like a fourth. How many Beatles videos have I got now? Apart from the singing ones, Julia and Getback and Eleanor Rigby. I've got the 2 Strawberry Fields. I've got the 2 Walkabouts. So yeah, quite a lot of Beatle type thing. This will be on there. I've got one more I actually want to do. So subscribe so that you can stay tuned, because I'm going to Liverpool. I've got to do those locations. The Beatles locations coming soon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.